Master's from George Washington University in '67 and his PhD from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana in '74. He's the president of the Carbondale Historical Society Museum from 1980 to present. He's the author of 26 ebooks on the history of Delaware and Hudson Canal Company and Gravity Railroad. He's author of 100 other articles. Welcome, Dr. Powell.
My pleasure. Thank you. Let me before I get in, let me tell you what's on that table over there. And please help yourself to any of these things. If they were all gone by the end of the evening, that would be great. I wouldn't care. So help yourself. This railroad that I'm going to talk about for the next 55 minutes or so is it was revised 5 times in the 19th century. So this pile of papers is what it was like in 1829. That describes what was going on in 1820. And I think these are very good summaries because they, in 3 or 4 pages, they summarize what was going on in 29. This is 1845, 59, 68, and then 99. So if you took one of these, each of these front 5, you would have essentially all these books I've done on the D&H. There are over 10,000 pages in those 26 books. I mean, it's a huge collection of stuff. But then I have condensed it and really tried to sort of zero in on the crucial points in each of these. So if you have one of each of these 5, you have a good representation of what I see as a summary history of this Gravity Railroad. And so help yourself to one of these things. These articles in the back, nothing gives me greater pleasure than writing and publishing and stuff. I love it. So anyhow, all those there's a railroad publication called the Bridgeline Historical Bulletin, and the last 80 issues of that have had an article by me. Each issue's got an article by me in that, and so these are copies of many of those articles. These are in each of these piles. There may be 2 or 3 different articles, but they are. I'm very proud of them. I think they're well done, and they've been well received. So, and then this pile, this bibliography, this is a listing of all the stuff I've written on the D&H Gravity Railroad. So on this, that's simply a list of the whole shooting match there on that page. So, and all the titles of all these articles, as I say, the writing of which gives me enormous pleasure. Anyhow, all those articles are listed on this bibliography, and the titles of them all are there, and the issue where they're located and everything else are also on there. All of these articles are also online. So if you go online and you type the titles as they appear on here, it should appear on the screen in front of you. So and there are over, I think there's like over 400 of them. But anyhow, so this is sort of like the key to the whole bunch of them, because this is a list of all of them, and it gives all the specifics on it, the number of pages, the ISBN number, and all that kind of stuff. But the titles are all there. So this is, in a way, this is like a key to the whole bunch of them over there. But and as I say, when I leave tonight, that table were empty, I would be very happy. I mean, I produce these copies and I hand them out all the time to people, and most people are very happy to get them because it's a concise report on what's there. And so anyhow, this railroad, the D&H Railroad, which opened in 1829, 195 years ago, was revised 5 times in the 19th century. It opened in 1829. They revised it in 29, 45, 59, 68, and then 99. They revised it 5 times. The main objective of it all was to get as much coal to market as possible by the easiest means. So when the road opened in 29, the railroad, for example, went up the mountain like this. In 45, it went up here. 58, 59, 68, 99. They kept revising it to try and to make the road, to get the easiest path over the mountain. And that's the mountain at Farview, and which is about 1,000 feet higher than Main Street, Carbondale, which is the big, that all the coal from the Upper Lackawanna Valley was taken up to Carbondale to the base of plane number 1, behind what used to be the Ben Mar restaurant, and then gotten onto various other locations there up over the mountain. So that was the name of the game. Get it to Carbondale and get it over the mountain. So in 1829, when the road opened, the line went up. It didn't. You might think it went up the road to Honesdale, Canaan Street. If you know that part of town, Canaan Street is Route 6 going to Honesdale. It never once in the whole history of the railroad did it go up Canaan Street. In 1829, it went just to the street to the left, which goes parallel with Canaan Street. But that street to the left is called Sage Court, and if you turn left at that intersection heading towards Simpson, the first street on the left, you look and there's it's an alleyway really. It's as straight as an arrow going up behind in people's backyards. That's where the railroad went in 1829. In 1845, the railroad went up that way also, but then it modified a lot after it got up the hill. In 45, it went up that way. In 59, it went up the street to the right of Canaan Street as you're going up the hill. Each time, and then in 68, it went up that way. And so the name of the game was to find the best way, and they kept exploring new routes. Each time they came up with a new route, they had to rebuild the line, which is a huge process. But I mean, they were very good at it, and they did it repeatedly and very successfully, because by the time of the Civil War, they were sending close to 1 million tons of coal over the mountain, which was just an astonishing achievement. But when the road opened in 29, it was designed by John Jervis, or John Jarvis, as some people pronounce it, and he and one of his colleagues, Benjamin Wright from the Erie Canal, and James Archibald, also working in the Erie Canal, were brought to Pennsylvania by the D&H. The D&H had the century-long habit of always getting the brightest and best people involved in what they were doing. And the Erie Canal, which opened in 1825, had just been completed when the D&H announced their plans to do this railroad. And they recruited then John Jarvis, Benjamin Wright, and James Archibald, 3 of the leading engineering minds in America at the time. They brought them to Carbondale to say, here we're building a railroad, we need help us, design this railroad for us. So that was characteristic of the D&H for the following 150 years. Always get the brightest and best people involved, and you're halfway there. And let them do what they were brought there to do, and they did that successfully. So the railroad that opened in 1829 was designed by John Jarvis. The railroad that opened in 45 was designed by James Archibald, and on it goes through the centuries. And so that they each had like their moment, and but they're, as I say, the leading engineering minds in America. When the road opened in 29, it was a single track operation, and this happened up behind, as I say, up behind the Ben Mar, which used to be the D&H district office. The Pennsylvania office of the D&H was the Ben Mar restaurant. And now, just within the last week, the restaurant is closed. I thought, oh no, that's a bad sign. The building may be coming down, but happily, the Zazera family is going to sell the building apparently to the YMCA, and the YMCA is going to somehow have child care or something going on in that building. They're not going to tear it down. The 4 Gravity Railroad shop buildings that were behind the Ben Mar, those gorgeous stone buildings that used to be there, were all National Register buildings, and they were all torn down by blankety blank, whatever, Zazera. And during a Pioneer Day parade, where most everyone in Carbondale was celebrating our history, Marino Zazera was up there tearing down National Register buildings while the parade was going on. I think just because he'd like to sort of rub your nose in it, how powerful he was. And so I got very nervous when the current owner of the Ben Mar, who's also a member of that large family, I thought, oh no, we're going to lose this wonderful building, which was built in the 1850s. But apparently the money from the YMCA is going to save the building, I guess. So that's good news on that account. There used to be 2 buildings like that, the Ben Mar building as the district or the Pennsylvania Division office, and the other one was taken down quite a number of years ago, but the one still remains. So anyhow, John Jarvis designed the railroad that opened in 29. The construction began in 1827. 31 contractors and crews worked on building the railroad through wilderness. There was nothing there. They said, we're going that way. We got all these gazillion trees to get out of the way, and we're going that way. And so 9 crews were under the direction of John Mills, 11 under James Archibald. It was completed in June of 29. So they made pretty good progress. I mean, it took them almost 2 years. The construction cost was $3 million in 1829 money. That's a lot of bananas in 1829, $3 million. And it was designed by John Jarvis. And it opened on October 9, 1829, 195 years ago, which was a long time ago. When the railroad opened, there were 5 planes to the top of the mountain. And the coal was brought into the base of the plane there behind the Ben Mar. And they had horses which they used like switcher engines. The horses moved the cars around to get them in the right place, to connect them to the cables. The cars were brought in to the base of the plane, connected to the cable, and then off it went up the plane. It was a single track plane with a turnout in the middle, so it could be used as like a 2-way street. There could be two loaded cars could be coming up. Empty cars could be coming down. They went into a side track in the middle with a self-acting switch, so the cars could get out of the way, and then the switch would go back to the way it should be. And so these planes were were out of Carbondale in this configuration, and there were 5 planes to the top of the mountain. Now, getting up to the top of the mountain was a big process. It was 1,000 feet in the air. And so that plane went up to the top of like Canaan Street and then veered off and went on until it got up to the top. They sort of zigzagged their way up the mountain. And there was a stationary steam engine at the top of the plane. The cars at the bottom of the plane were connected to this cable, the rotating cable in the plane, and then they were pulled up. At the top of the plane, the cable was unhooked by a person whose only job was to unhook the cars at the top of the plane. And then the car sort of went over the hump of the plane, and there, it's on that level. And in 1829, when it unhooked, they still had to get to the next plane. And so at the top of the plane, when the car was unhooked, there's the plane number 2. They had to get over there, and as Jarvis designed it, it was more or less level, which means they had to have a horse pull the car from the top of the plane to the base of the next plane, where it was connected into the next plane going up, and the same way for the 5 planes. And the use of horses was very dominant in the early years. But James Archibald, who redid the road in 45, wanted to get rid of all the horses as soon as possible because they were very high maintenance, and machines are much easier than horses when you're dealing with all this coal, getting them over the mountain. So he had these planes at the top of these planes where they were unhooked from the cable, and then they sort of went over the hump of the plane, and they had to be connected again. In 1845, when they redid the road, instead of having the planes sort of level at the top after they were disconnected, they had a downgrade. So when the car was unhooked from the cable, it coasted to the base of the next plane. It was connected up again, and then it unhooked and it coasted to the next plane. That was a great improvement because you didn't have to rely on the horse then. If you have horses, you've got to feed them, take care of them, get them there, and the whole business. With a machine, you're just sort of turning it on and off. And so that was a management problem at the top of that plane. Also, they had to deal with the fact that these planes were just going off through the wilderness, and they had to get the horses and all that where they needed to be at the right time. So they got the coal through this system of 5 planes to the top of the mountain, and that was by going up the mountain this way in 1829. And they were able to get about 100,000 tons of coal per year. The rails that these cars were operating on were made out of hemlock. And on the top of these hemlock rails, they attached strap iron. And beneath the strap iron, they had various kinds of insulating stuff, like strips of beechwood, in order to make it as solid as possible. This was a big problem because there were always problems with the rails, and they managed to make it work for a long time. They had these hemlock rails for a long time, and but they eventually got rid of them after the Civil War. But these strap rails, which were 2.5 inches wide, 1/2 inch thick, and 15.5 feet long, they got them from, there were no foundries in America at the time who made these strap rails. They got them from William Hanbury Sparrow and John Sly Sparrow of Temple Street, Wolverhampton, Staffordshire, England. So these strap rails were all imported from Great Britain because nobody was making them here, but they needed to have these rails. And they were used on the system until 1858, strap rails, which are tricky, but because they're in. The big problem with these strap rails is that at one end of the rail, they were always popping out of the thing, and then you had what the railroaders call a snake height. That one back end of the railroad jumps up in the air at you, and you have all kinds of problems with that. But they used them until 1858.
Oh. Hey, Brett.
And Cody has one to show us here now. There's the piece of the strap rail right there. And we have a large quantity of that, which we have found on the mountain above Carbondale. And let's just put that on your chair next to you, Cody. They can look at that later on. But the strap rails were replaced by regular T-rails in 1858. But these strap rails, they had to import them all, and I came across some statistics recently. Where are my statistics? They're here on this page somewhere. Give me a second. They're really interesting, the numbers. Well, they are eluding me. Give me a second. There. We won't worry about them right now. But there's the number of tons of strap rails that they had to import to do the whole line is just amazing. It's just positively amazing. When the road opened in '29, these cars were pulled up these plains by chains. Hand-forged chains were attached to these cars and pulled up these plains. They were a constant headache because these hand-forged chains were always breaking. And if you have several coal cars on a plane ahead of you and the chain breaks, well, then those cars come careening down the track and they have a big smash up at the bottom. So they used these chains only for 1 month in the fall of '29 when the railroad opened. And they had so many problems with them and the chains breaking, these hand-forged planes. If you know the area up there, like where, if you know where White's Crossing is, and you may take you go up Canaan Street, and you get to like number 4 pond. I mean, the chains were like going from White's Crossing 3/4 of the way up that entire hill. So you had this enormously long chain pulling these cars up the mountain. It's an invitation for calamity. So they only used these chains to pull the cars up in 1829 for 1 month in the fall. The road opened in October, and they only used these chains for a month or so in the fall of '29. And the next spring when they opened, the chains were all gone, and they had hemp rope chains, which last forever. If a hemp rope is going to break, you can see it wearing out. And they used the hemp rope to pull the cars to the top of the mountain until 1858, at which point they began to use John Roebling's wire rope, which would last forever. So they had the chains, then the hemp ropes, and then the wire rope, Roebling's wire rope, which was the best solution of them all. The planes, they got them to the top of the mountain, and up by number 4 pond, if you know where that is, on the top of the mountain there above Carbondale, number 4 pond. Number 5 plane went across there, right across there before descending the other side of the mountain down into Waymart. But at number 5 pond, there was a long, when they got to the top of the mountain, there was a long flat section called level number 1, so they could go across without too much problem. The cars could be pulled across the top of the mountain, and they were pulled by horses initially. But that wasn't the original plan. The original plan was to have a small steam engine, such as perhaps the Stourbridge Lion or the other American engines that they ordered in Great Britain, pull the cars across the top of the mountain there by number 4 pond. So the cars went across the top of the mountain then, and then they descended down 2 or 3 planes into Waymart. At the bottom of those 2 or 3 planes down into Waymart, there was a large trestle which kept them up in the air, and they continued on their way to Honesdale. And so the loaded cars then rolled down that long level past Keene's Pond all the way to Honesdale. They had what they called the 6-mile level and the 4-mile level. That journey between Waymart and Honesdale, for 6 miles they were on this thing called the 6-mile level, and then they had another plane which took the cars down lower as it got closer to Honesdale, which was called the 4-mile level. So they with this to get into Honesdale. And the cars then were still coasting downhill between Waymart and Honesdale. You're going downhill all the way. So the cars rolled down these in Prompton. They had another plane which took them down another bit, and then they kept going, and then they took them right into downtown Honesdale. But there were problems with that too. It was so complicated. When they got them on the 6-mile level, they coasted by themselves. In Prompton, they had to lower them down. They needed a horse to make that happen, so they had a horse there to get them down to the 4-mile level into Honesdale. Then after that, they came on that plane. They were then taken into Honesdale. So it was sort of labor intensive, but that was the only possibility. That was the best they could do, and it was state of the art at the time. But the thing of it was, in order to get the cars eventually then got into Honesdale and they were loaded into canal boats. Then the question is getting the horses back to where they have to be to do what they have to do. So the horses then came back from Honesdale towards Prompton, and they pulling empty cars because they were sort of going uphill. Then they had that plane in Prompton. They had to pull up the plane to get the cars up there. Then they had to pull all the way from Prompton back to Waymart. So the end result of which is that you then have at Waymart, you have horses, and they will deal with the next coal coming from Carbondale. But you don't need a horse to get the coal from Waymart to Prompton. They'll go down grade by themselves. So these horses were there in Prompton, in Waymart. So they had horse cars where at the beginning of that downhill plane in Waymart, the horses went into these horse cars and then rode down that 6-mile level with the coal cars, so they could be back to where they needed to be to pull the cars back up when they were empty. So it was just a nightmare of manipulation of horses and coal cars. But that was the only option they had at the time. There were no other options available. So they made it work, and but the coal got into Honesdale, into the canal boats, and away it went to the Hudson River, which is I just can't even imagine digging a ditch 15 feet wide and 5 feet deep for 120 miles. I mean, can you with picks and shovels and blasting powder? That was it. No big earth-moving machines. What an unbelievable backbreaking enterprise it was. And so they got the cars, emptied them into canal boats, and away they went. I should say that I mentioned at the head of each of these planes, as they were going up the mountain, there were stationary steam engines. Stationary steam engine at the top, which pulled the cars up the plane. There was a 30 horsepower engine at number 1, 35 horsepower engines at 2, 3, and 5, 25 horsepower at number 4. They pulled the cars up these planes. And as I said, an iron chain was when the road opened. And from the following year up to 1856, they used hemp rope. And then from 56 to the end of the 19th century, they used Robling's wire rope. So that was things got better all the way around. And they managed to get a lot of coal to the market in that first year and called it a day. The interesting thing about this 6 mile level and the 4 mile level and all this business with Horatio Allen going to England, you may have heard that story. Horatio Allen was adamant about it. He came back to Honesdale in the 1880s, a big hero. He was at a retiring age, and he came back to sort of celebrate what he had done in 1829. He was made a local hero in Honesdale, and he was an amazing man. But anyhow, I say that because he was associated with, of course, with the Stourbridge Lion, about which there has been a lot of crap put in print over the last 150 years. You know, it's just unbelievable about the Stourbridge Lion, which was the question was Horatio Allen sent to England by the D&H, or did he go to England and then with a commission to do this for the D&H while there? Horatio Allen said in the 1880s when he was at public speaking in Honesdale, "I was not sent by the D&H. I was going to England. The D&H asked me if I would do this." There's a big difference in that, whether he was the emissary of the D&H or whether he was going to England and he was going to do them a favor by ordering these engines. The engine it turned out to be, the Stourbridge Lion, which was brought back, was too heavy for the existing superstructure on which the thing had to operate, and it wouldn't hold. The trestle was not strong enough to hold it. And it's one of those interesting mistakes that happened, because when the D&H said they wanted to get have Horatio Allen order this engine, the Stourbridge Lion, the weight was not to exceed 7 tons. The big problem is not long after the Stourbridge Lion was put on the track, they knew immediately the track started to wobble, and oh my God, it's going to fall down. And it's because it's a wonderful problem. There's a difference between, I'm not sure what the correct term is, but there's a metric ton and then a regular another kind of ton. I don't know the term. There are 2 different kinds of tons.
Standard ton or metric?
Metric and?
Standard.
Standard. And one of them is much heavier than the other, and that's a system used in Great Britain. So the Great Britain, with the best of intentions, produced it not exceeding 7 tons, but that was much heavier than the American definition of what 7 tons was all about. That's one of the primary reasons why the trestle didn't hold, because it was significantly heavier than they ordered, even though it was still 7, but there was difference in the tonnage requirement. So the trestle didn't work. On those days in August of whenever it was, 28 or 9, when they tried it out, it was clear it was a failure. This can't work. And if there was one thing that the D&H was not, they were not sentimental. The Stourbridge Lion, which on that glorious day in early 19th century didn't satisfy their needs. They took it off the track, put it by the side of the tracks, and said, "Okay, we're moving on, leaving that aside. We can't worry about that. That didn't work. We need to make other plans." So in this system, and it remained there for a long, long time. Most of the 19th century, it remained there. People were pillaging things off of it, and it was a mistake. Too bad. Boom, on to the show. And so on the system that opened in 29, there were 3 places where an engine like the Stourbridge Lion would have worked. It would have worked on the top of the mountain at Farview, which was a long level stretch where this engine could just go along by number 4 pond, pulling coal cars. And then also on these plains between Waymart and Honesdale, there were also these long stretches where it could have pulled an engine like the Stourbridge Lion could have pulled cars. Those are the only three places where the cars were essentially moving along on flat land and not coasting on down grades or being pulled by cables. There's a big discussion about how many engines did Horatio Allen order in England. Was it 3, was it 2, was it 4, what was going on? The D&H needed 3 engines. And Horatio Allen said he ordered 3 engines. Okay. Lots of nitwits since then have written all kinds of articles about oh, no, there's 5. What about the Delaware and the America and all these engines? They're just people making up stories for the sake of making up a story. I have the inside track on that. But the D&H was not in the habit of ordering. They didn't have a supply cabinet. Anything they had was in use on tracks. You know, they weren't ordering an extra engine to sit by the side of the tracks. So I'm quite convinced that they ordered 3 engines, and to be used on the level on the top of by number 5 and on the way from Weimar to Honesdale. I say all that because there's a lot of garbage in print about the Stourbridge Lion. Oh, and Honesdale has this thing about the home of railroading in America. Railroading in America failed. They didn't get to Honesdale because of the railroading started in Carbondale, and then the end of the line of the canal was Honesdale. Anyhow, there's been a lot of people who've done lots of writing about, oh yes, it was one of 5 engines and so on, and this box was on the engine when it collapsed, and people come up with all kinds of, primarily I think maybe antique dealers trying to create a market for products they had. So there's a lot of crap in print about the sacred Stourbridge Lion, which then went to the Smithsonian, and it's now I think in Baltimore, and it's this failure of an engine because it didn't meet their needs. So there's a lot of stuff in print. When I was doing those volumes on the history of the D&H, I thought I have to address this question of the Stourbridge Lion. I can't not write about it. I have to make some kind of a statement on it. And so I went with a machete through reports by people who were just inventing stuff, just for the. They wasn't careful academic research. They were just guessing, and there was a lot of crap in print about it, and people coming up with saying that this was in the engine and that was on and on and on. No way to prove it. Nothing to substantiate it. So I think the volume on the Stourbridge Lion was one of the last ones I did when I did all those volumes, because I knew I had to do it. I had to focus on that question somehow or other, and. After I finished it, I thought, well, okay, I'm pretty courageous when I get a pen in my hand or I sit at a keyboard. I will take chances and I will attack and I will, I'm not a coward by any means. I'm a physical mess, but I'm intellectually I'm a powerhouse. Anyhow, so the Stourbridge Lion. I thought, all right, I wrote this several 100-page volume on the Stourbridge Lion. And I gave it to a man in Honesdale whose name was Ab Rutherford. He was a judge in Honesdale. He was a very enthusiastic, very devoted railroad fan, and he knew a lot about railroads. So when I finished it, he said to me at one point, Robert, when you finish that, I want to read it. I thought, okay. It's like giving your term paper to the teacher. What are you going to say? So I thought, okay, fine. I can deal with whatever he says. I gave it to Judge Rutherford, and. I waited, nothing. I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on here? And then I ran into him at a social event, and he came rushing at me. He said, Robert, thank you. You have finally done what should have been done a long time ago, and you've separated the sheep from the goats, and it's wonderful. Thank you very much. I thought, I can start breathing again. I mean, to get his good housekeeping seal of approval from Ab Rutherford meant, and still does mean, he's now deceased, means a lot to me. Then he said to me, Robert, I want to get me another copy. I want to send this to Stourbridge, England, to the British historians. I want them to read what you've done about this engine that came from England. Oh my God. Here we go, out of the frying pan into the fire. I thought, oh my God, these British historians are unbelievable. They're wonderful historians. In Stourbridge, England, there's a whole big thing about engines, and they make lots of stuff. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and then I got a direct contact from couple of the Stourbridge historians about what I had done. And I'm happy to tell you, they repeated just what Ab Rutherford said. Robert, thank you. You finally cut through all the garbage in print. Wonderful. I thought if nothing good ever happens to me for the rest of my life, I'm vindicated by having taken a stand. I mean, I have as many shortcomings as all of us have, but I mean, when it comes to producing a historical document, I will go to the ends of the earth to make sure that I've got it right and substantiate things and not come up with just guesses. And so when I got the Good Housekeeping seal of approval from the British historians, I thought, oh my God, thank you very much. So anyhow, that's the Stourbridge line was 1829. So when the road then they got a lot of coal to market in those first couple of years, even though they were building a railroad through the most difficult environment possible. There's nothing but dense forest. They had to cut down trees, put in all kinds of fill here and there to get the engines, get the coal to Honesdale. In '45, they modified the roadbed again. It went up that Sage Court again, and then after it got to the top of Sage Court, it took off a pattern this way because they felt it was better to go up this way than to go up that way, and they rebuilt this and rebuilt and rebuilt. And so they had what was the second manifestation of the railroad through a new route to the top of the mountain. And up it went. If you know the area, it was 1, 2, and 3 got you to like White's Crossing, and then you went up the hill by number 4 Pond. That was where number 4 engine house was. The most remarkable thing is at the top of the mountain there by number 4 Pond, these cars going over the mountain, they were pulled up a plane, then they coasted on what they call the level. They would coast a long way, then they were taken up again. So the levels could have been 500 yards long, but if they were going down grade, then they went to the base, then they were pulled up again. When they got to the mountain by number 4 Pond, they had number 5 level, it was called. You follow you go through the woods. You can be aware that you're on a former railroad bed just by the way it feels, and you get to the edge of number 4 Pond, and I realized at that point that the level on number 5 plane went right across number 4 Pond, and I mentioned that to somebody my age who's been in Carbondale forever, and he said, "Robert, you're right. When I was a kid, they drained number 4 Pond, and they found this trestle across the pond. I thought, oh my gosh, what a lucky break. The trestle is still there." So the railroad then went across number 4 Pond, and then on the other side of the pond, number 5 plane went up out of there. And last summer, a buddy of mine and I found the place where the trestle grounded then on the other side of number 4 Pond before it went up for the final push to the top of the mountain. That was very gratifying. We were trudging through the woods in a sort of swampy, guppy, all kinds of crap. We found the engine where it came off of number 4 Pond, and then up on it went then to get to the top of the mountain. The cars were then taken down the path to get to Waymart. Then they had to deal with all this business of the coasting area and the horses and all that business. But that was James Archibald said, no, we're getting rid of those horses. We're not going to do that. So what he came up with is that he was going to separate the loaded track and the light track. So the cars went to Honesdale by the loaded track, by the 1829 path. That was okay to get them to Honesdale. Instead of dealing with the problems involved with coming back with the horses and all that on the plane, he created a separate light track from Honesdale back to Waymart, light track for empty cars. And the first plane for the cars to get out of Honesdale was right behind the Historical Society in Honesdale. It's plane number 13, which goes up the mountain at a very steep angle like this. But they get the cars, they had to get them as high as they could because the destination then is to go from that point to Waymart. You got to get them up there as high as you can to get a good start on the whole matter. So that plane just behind the Historical Society, that was the first plane, empty track plane back to Waymart, and from there they then went down to number 14. But these planes, there were 5 planes between Honesdale and Waymart. The first one, as I said, was operated by a stationary steam engine. These were all designed by James Archibald. He had an extreme interest in other forms of motivation, including water power. So the first plane was by this stationary steam engine. When it got to the next plane, was when they started using water. There were water wheels. There were water wheels on these 4 planes between Honesdale and Waymart. Gigantic water wheels that provided the motive power to get these cars back to Waymart. And I could take you within 20 minutes to a spot near Prompton where a raceway coming out of the Prompton Dam, it goes through the woods and through the woods and the woods, and it goes right to the base of Plane 15, it's amazing that it's still there. The raceway, the water coming from from the Prompton Dam takes you right to there, and right at that point there's another engine going up. But that engine was powered by water from the Prompton Dam. And between then Honesdale and Waymart, there were 4 planes that were powered by water wheels, which is amazing. The middle of the 19th century was enamored with water wheels. They were everywhere. When they redid this railroad in 1845, there was a 50-foot water wheel at the top of Canaan Street that pulled the cars up the first plane out of Carbondale. On the return plaque from Honesdale back to Waymart, there were those 4 planes that had water wheels on them. And the water for those all came from off the mountain. There were all these little feeder ponds all over the hillsides where they got the water to come get down there to power these. Most of them were undershot water wheels, but the one on plane number 15 was an overshot water wheel, where the water came this way and fell onto the water wheel and not at the bottom of the water wheel. And the most astonishing thing is the water wheel on plane 15. All of us have driven by there 100 times in the last 10 years. It is. You can actually see it as you drive on the highway to Honesdale. There it is. But it's water from the Prompton Dam, which was coming through the woods to power the water wheel. It's really amazing and they used water wheels until 1868. There were water wheels everywhere in downtown Carbondale. Parallel to the railroad tracks, there was a water wheel, a canal, which was an offshoot of the Lackawanna River. They brought it into the D&H yard and it powered machinery there, and then it went all the way down through Carbondale and then rejoined the Lackawanna River in South Carbondale. Water wheels everywhere. At the end of the 19th century, they were doing some kind of excavation in Carbondale. They were building a coal pocket behind what used to be Hornbeck Chevrolet. And as they were digging this coal pocket, they thought, what the heck did we just click into? What's going on here? When one of the water wheels, I think it was probably the water wheel on the head of plane number 1, when it was put out of service, they just tipped it over and then buried it. They exhumed this water wheel in the middle of Carbondale. No, where the hell did this come from? Who knows anything about this? It was the whole thing in the papers for about a week. Finally, people came forward and said, oh yes, that was on plane number 1. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. So it stimulated all kinds of stuff about water wheels. And but one of those water wheels in downtown Carbondale was powered by the Fall Brook. I live out in the country towards Finch Hill, and the Fall Brook begins on the property I live on. And it starts out being about that wide. And by the time it gets to Carbondale, it's a full-fledged stream. But it starts out coming out of the mountain below Mud Pond on our property, and it's just this little bit of a thing, but it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it goes into that was the water that powered some of those planes. So water power was a very dominant thing in mid-19th century America. But the good thing was I was well, how did it happen? I got a phone call from a woman who had just bought a house. And she said, there's some kind of ruins in my backyard. What is it? I said, well, I don't know. Where do you live? She said, it's on Bear Swamp Road on the way to Honesdale. I said, well, I'll come by and see what I think it's probably railroad related, but I'll come by and see what's going on here. On Bear Swamp Road is the only surviving gravity railroad plane almost intact. It is an unbelievable treasure, and it's owned by a couple of very historically minded people who are working on cleaning up the grounds around it, and they will receive people to visit their plane, and they're just terrifically enlightened historical people. And you can see the inclined planes for the loaded track and the light track. You can see the engine house site. There's all this stuff is there on their property. And if this organization, anybody in this organization, or several of you wanted to go visit that site, I could contact these people and make a visit possible. It's the only site, it's the only intact gravity railroad site where you see the loaded track going up this way, the light track, and all this stuff. The quarry where they got the stone for the stationary steam engine. It is an amazing treasure, which is about 75 yards from Route 6. It's right over there in the woods. You go by it all the time, and because of this little tree cover, you don't see what's behind it. But it's right over there, and it's been hiding out for the last 150 years. It's like, it answers so many questions about the operation of those planes. It's even got a point where the loaded track goes over the light track, and it's like you can see it. If somebody said, "Look, do you see that? And you see that?" That's what it is, and so it's a wonderful site to have it there and be so accessible. And as I say, the owners of the property are very history minded and are delighted to have visitors. So I'd be happy to go with anybody who wants to go over and look at that stuff. I can make the arrangements with the owners to go see it, and it's a wonderful thing that's happening over there. So we had two versions of the road bed. The one formation number 1 and formation number 2. In '59, then they decided maybe we should go this way. So they put in 8 planes going this way to circle around and get to the top of the mountain. Maybe that's the best way of doing it. Such an unbelievable work project to put in these 8 planes going up the mountain through dense woods, and oh my gosh, they did it. So they had 8 planes that went north to Simpson and then curved around up through the woods and got the cars to the top of the mountain. And many remains of that are still visible today, and it was an amazing achievement, because then after they got into the top of the mountain at Farview, and then the cars then went down into Waymart and then followed the usual path to get into Honesdale. But so that was yet one more try at finding the most efficient route over the mountain. So that was the third try to get over the mountain. It's on that, but I'll mention something very hot about that site too. But that was done in '58. Also, then I have to back up a little bit. In the second version of the railroad, there was another thing which happened, which is very relevant to those of you seated here now. The railroad was extended to Archibald in 1843. It came down here. They discovered discovered coal. James Archibald and James Clarkson discovered coal in Archibald in 1843. And in 45, 46, a system of gravity planes was built down the Lackawanna Valley, Archibald, and back to Carbondale. 1 south plane, they call it the old Blakely plane, and 2 north planes. This is in 1845, 46. And there were 2 planes from up here, I guess in the area of like Frogtown, when it came down in there, 2 planes going up that mountain to get coal to the top of the hill to get it to Carbondale. And that site is very easy to visit. But the thing of it is that it was in 1845 was the first time that the railroad made a push to come down the Lackawanna Valley, and they got that as far as those 3 planes. And there's a lot of information about those 3 planes, primarily because of one man. I think maybe some of you might recognize his name. I think it was P.A. Philbin, Philbin, who was the mastermind of the Archibald Citizen. which was a spectacular newspaper. Does anybody know what the story on that? Has it been microfilmed? Dale, do you know?
Yes.
Oh, that's good. And he had, I think she was his daughter, Miss Celia Field.
Right down the street here.
Stood
Right down the street.
down here.
She was a
About 5 blocks.
wonderful person. She had such a strong commitment to history. And because of the Philbins, a lot is known about coal in this part of the Lackawanna Valley. They did a magnificent job of recording it. Philbin himself, at Gravity Railroad reunions in the early 20th century, he was a hot speaker. He always gave an address, and he spoke about what happened here in the 1840s. And I think he probably was the only person who could do that. And the exact path of the railroad through this part of the country, he identifies. It first went up by the Jones house and then turned left by the garage and went up the hill and turned over by the new this, that, and the other. He identified people's houses by names and through backyards and stuff for the voyage through Archibald and on south. So he rendered an enormous favor to history by getting this stuff on paper, because he was, I say, the primary speaker at these Gravity reunions in Naog Park at the end of the 19th century, and so we owe a lot to him for having recorded that. There were two planes right up here in 45. One was built by Patrick Gilmartin under the direction of Gideon Frothingham, and so he even provide names of the people who were working on it, and they were all going to the White Oak mine, which had two planes 1 and 2 on the White Oak mine, which got the coal to the top of the mountain above Archibald here, and then the track was put in, which took it right into downtown Carbondale. So you sometimes get lucky and come across these amazing discoveries of people having done remarkable things a long time ago. An interesting thing again about Archibald I came across is the fact, I learned this from something Philbin wrote. He says, quote, "It is a fact not generally known that the T-rails used in building the main line of the Erie Railroad were shipped to their destination from Scranton's mills in Slocum Hollow by way of Archibald," which is so interesting. The Scrantons were producing rails. The Erie Railroad, going from Piermont all the way up into New York, needed rails. And there were very few places in America where you could get them. The Scrantons started making rails. And the Scrantons needed these rails to get to Binghamton before, I think it was, I have the date here. It was something like New Year's Day in 1849. As fast as the iron was ready, it was drawn by teams 9 miles to Archibald from the Scranton Metal Iron Works to Archibald, then the southern terminus of the Gravity Railroad. On this road, it was carried over the mountain to Honesdale. So these rails from Scranton were brought here, put on those 2 planes that were on the mountain here from those early mines, shipped by those 2 planes, and carried over the Moosic Mountain to Honesdale at the head of the canal. So here they have these rails coming into Archibald. Over the mountain they go, and they also got the rails to the Erie Railroad, to Equinunk, Stockport, Deposit, and Lanesboro. So they 400 mules and horses were employed in carrying rails, iron rails, from here to get them to the Erie Railroad. And I mention all this because of the fact that the railroads, on Monday they would have killed each other for a nickel. I mean, and Tuesday they would work together. You know, they were very willing to compromise. One day you're our competitor, the next day we'll help you. Anyhow, so if the Erie didn't get to Binghamton by New Year's Day, I guess it's 1850, I think it was. Let me get it. Unless rails were laid and Erie had the road working or in order between Hudson and Binghamton by January 1st, 1849, the Erie would forfeit all its rights, franchises, and titles to the state. In other words, whatever they had done in building the Erie Railroad would have gone down the drain. They were given this loan of a huge sum of money by the state of New York, and if you don't get it there by New Year's Day, you're out of business. Over 400 mules and horses were employed in carting. From these points, all rails were simultaneously laid, resulting in the completed track, according to the agreement with the state, 5 days before the fixed date. The celebration of the event in Binghamton on 28 December 1848 was one of the greatest demonstrations ever witnessed in this country. The contract was a profitable one to the New Iron Company, notwithstanding the expense and labor connected with its fulfillment. And it all happened, I thought it was interesting to know, by bringing the rails for the Erie Railroad here to Archibald and getting them on this railroad to Erie Railroad. There were no foundries in America making rails at the time, but the Scrantons were a little later, when they needed all these tons of coal early on in the century. When I have the arrival in New York from England of 5,000 tons of railroad iron on Tuesday is noted in the Carbondale transcript. 8 vessels arrive in New York from England with cargoes of railroad iron. The ship Medallion, 893 tons. Amelia, 845 tons. Ship Monte Cristo, 782 tons. Champlain, 745 tons. Just unbelievable. A total of 8 vessels with 5,000 tons of railroad rails, just like what on that piece of on that display that Cody has there. That is a lot of rail. 5,000 tons of railroad rail. In Carbondale, we found on the mountain above Carbondale, we found quite a number of pieces of that strap rail, because the railroads, when they replaced the strap rail with regular T-rails, the strap rail just got sort of thrown over the bank. And so, knowing where those roadbeds were, if you look at the bottom of the bank, you can sometimes find amazing treasures in the bottom of the bank. But that was an interesting side note to the gravity thing in Carbondale. They redid the road in 59, and by putting in 8 new planes going this way, to the top of the mountain, maybe we can get it up there easier to the top of the mountain. So that was the third redoing of a railroad line. In 59, they then extended the valley, the railroad down this valley. In 59, they had a plane go right into Archibald, and then also they sent coal from Archibald also further down to Peckville, and the railroad was moving down the valley, and then there were 2 planes getting down to the Lackawanna River in Peckville, and here in Archibald, plane number 20, they extended the line to the base of plane 21, which is right here in downtown Archibald, at the end of the main street through Archibald, is where plane number 21 was. And so 21 went up, and Philbin, bless his heart again, the plane went up, and it went by the Jones house, and then across from the Phillips house, and so on. He tells it how the railroad got from here to Peckville. It went down to Peckville, where right at what was it called, the Mellow Center, right by the Lackawanna River. There was the end of another plane, and they had 2 planes going up to get in on the other side of the river. The destination being down in the area below what is the name of that? What on earth is the name? My mind is just drawn blank. The Oliphant. Getting Oliphant. So there was the railroad was extended to Oliphant, and that was the end of the Flatland Gravity Railroad. People know about the Mountain Gravity Railroad going from Carbondale to Honesdale, but this was in the Lackawanna Valley. There was also this railroad which was essentially on flat land. There were plains, but they weren't going over a mountain, and so the railroad went down to Oliphant, and at Oliphant they connected with tracks which went farther down the valley. And in Oliphant, they connected with the Von Storch breaker was in Providence, and there was a Richmond breaker down there as well. And so after they got that far with the railroad, they then it was still gravity cars with gravity gauge tracks went into Green Ridge on flat land, and so there was a flat land gravity railroad down to down to the Green Ridge Yard. And they had to have that flatland track because those breakers in Green Ridge were producing coal to be sent to Honesdale. So they had to get the coal from those breakers to Carbondale. So they had flatland gravity cars bringing the coal to Oliphant, at the base of the plain at Oliphant, and then getting it up over the mountain. And there were 5 gravity gauge D&H steam locomotives, believe it or not, which then carry the coal from Green Ridge and from Providence up to the base of plane number 23 in Oliphant, and then they connected to this gravity system that took the coal to Carbondale and then over the mountain. So they kept reaching out, far expanding their area of coverage throughout the 19th century. And that flatland gravity was, there were gravity gauge steam locomotives. We know what a standard full-size steam locomotive looks like, but they had gravity gauge, these little choo-choo engines kind of stuff, which were coming up through the Lackawanna Valley to Oliphant, getting the coal to Honesdale. And as I say, it's one of those things which has sort of, it's out there. And I learned of this because there's a man by the name of Shaughnessy who wrote a wonderful book on the D&H many years ago. And I was reading his book a long time ago, and he said in it, I remember before he died, I was on speaking programs with him, but Shaughnessy would speak, then I would speak, then somebody. Anyhow, Shaughnessy said, Robert, I don't understand what these gravity gauge tracks are in Oliphant. What are they doing down? What are they doing in Peckville? And he didn't know what they were all about. And I've since learned that in fact they were gravity tracks. He didn't realize that the railroad went from the base of number 23 plane in Oliphant down as far as Green Ridge. So it was a very nice discovery when I put that all together. But there was a railroad called the Union Railroad, which not far from Providence put in a line from Green Ridge to Wilkes-Barre, a standard gauge rail line. The Union Railroad, as soon as the Union Railroad was finished, the D&H, being smart little guys like they were, they made an arrangement with the Union Railroad Company to put gravity tracks between their standard gauge tracks. And so the D&H was then able to get to Wilkes-Barre. And they did that like 40 miles down, and the coal was brought from Wilkes-Barre up to Oliphant, being pulled by gravity gauge steam locomotives to the base of plane number 23, and then over the mountain to here to get it to Honesdale. So that's another area where the D&H was just always pushing the envelope to get their market base bigger. There were in Wilkes-Barre. There were an enormous mining operation called the Baltimore Mines. In the Baltimore Mines, they got a lot of coal for a long time, and it all came in these little gravity cars to Oliphant, and then went over the mountain. It went up to Cardinal and went over the mountain. So it's intriguing to sort of be a detective and see how these things work themselves out over the years. The railroad continued to make lots of money and to affect life in the Lackawanna Valley in a big way, except by the end of the 19th century, it got to the point where gravity railroad operations were not big enough and widespread enough for the D&H to make an appropriate amount of money. So they decided they abandoned the gravity railroad system, at which point they had to convert then. They had an existing system of transportation between Oliphant and Honesdale. And they then had to convert all of that to standard gauge tracks, wider tracks, which they did. And they then started hauling coal from far and wide to get it to the gravity system here, all the tracks of which were expanded to standard gauge. And they managed to get a lot of coal over the mountain after that conversion happened. And in order to get it over the mountain, in the 5th manifestation of this railroad, they had to widen they had to move the gravity tracks out 5.5 inches to get standard gauge. The gravity gauge is sort of narrow, and then they had to move the tracks out to get these standard gauge coal cars over the mountain. And so that was the primary business of the 5th incarnation of this railroad was to widen, to convert, let me read a paragraph here. So we had a successful operating gravity system. The completion of the Green Age gravity railroad that was converted in the period January 1, 1889, February 1900, they had to convert a gravity railroad into a steam locomotive railroad, a standard gauge steam locomotive. So in the fifth incarnation of this railroad, they converted all these gravity planes and all their gravity operations into standard gauge operations, which were much wider. And beginning January 1, 1899, the resulting components of the gravity railroad were converted in 3 phases. And then they had three steps. They converted the gravity railroad to a standard gauge railroad. And in order to do that, a lot of the planes on the Moosic Mountain were not acceptable for standard gauge traffic because they were too steep. So they had to do yet another manifestation of getting their planes getting their coal to Honesdale. So they essentially what they did is convert a gravity railroad into a standard gauge railroad. And so in doing that, they had to move the tracks out, one of the tracks 5.5 inches to get it to be standard gauge, which they did. And there were 2 things that they had a problem with. One was you can't take a standard gauge locomotive through Shepherd's Crook, which was this turning of the tracks. In 1868, when the plane was coming down, the trains were coming down from Farview, they got to this point, and I could walk you to the very spot where it happened, where the tracks went this way, and then they curved around, and they came right around like this on this famous Shepherd's Crook, which took the rail cars into Carbondale. You can't, the tight curve was too much for any standard locomotive. So what they had to do was they had to convert that from a sharp curve into a switchback, whereby the rail car went up this way and then sort of scissored back. So it was like a straight line kind of thing to get the cars up onto the top of the mountain. So once they had the cars on top of the mountain, and at one point they were dealing with standard gauge full-size railroad cars and steam locomotives on the top of the Moosic Mountain. You can believe that. How do we get them down? In order to get them down, they built what was called the South Canaan Loop, which the railroad went way down the valley and then gradually sort of curved around and got the tracks into Waymart. And then they converted the line from Waymart to Honesdale to a standard gauge, and they were home free. But that was the last expression of this gravity railroad. And this all happened in 1899, 1900. On October 28th, it was announced by Horace Young, second vice president, that on December 31, all passenger freight and coal trains will discontinue running on the gravity railroad until further notice. That was like, for all these people in the Lackawanna Valley, it was like announcing the end of the world. What? Our livelihood is all connected to that railroad. They're closing it. It was a major thing. But then they opened the railroad, and the new railroad, and it was a huge success. And completed in January 1900. In getting these loaded cars up to the top of the mountain, they took Shepherd's Crook out, which was just longer, and they put in a switchback, which managed to get the cars to the top of the mountain. At one point in this whole process, you could have seen at the top of the mountain full-size steam locomotives. You wonder how in the heck did that get up here? But they did it by just following the ridge lines and taking it very gradual. They got it to the top of the mountain. They really were amazing people. So the converted line opened on February 1, 1900. That's when the last vestige of the gravity railroad had been converted into a standard locomotive line. Tragically, William McMullen, the Honesdale branch trainmaster, a central figure in the installation of the Honesdale branch of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad, who personally supervised not only the widening of the 23.74 gravity gauge stacks to standard gauge in less than 24 hours over the weekend of January 21, and also the South Canaan Loop, was accidentally killed at Panther Bluff on February 16, 1900, 15 days after the line was officially opened. He got off an engine to throw a switch as he returned to the tour of inspection from the Honesdale branch, and then he was tragically killed. So the guy who made it all happen, instead of looking at his work, got run over by a locomotive. The amazing thing about, one of the amazing things about this rail line over the mountain was after they instituted passenger service, they did so because they found that people were riding on these coal cars, the empty coal cars over the mountain. People were sort of like joyriding. They grab a hold of it, get on an empty coal car and ride over the mountain. The D&H, who was always prepared to make an extra dollar, they decided, since they all love to ride on the coal cars so much, they established a park at the top of the mountain. It was called Farview Park. It was an unbelievable park. I think I have a nice description of it. Let me read it. Let me find it. Passenger service on the Gravity Railroad was an instant and huge success, and the public very quickly learned that riding over the Moosic Mountain and through the celebrated Shepherd's Crook on level 20 was an enjoyable and thrilling experience. The D&H capitalized on the success of passenger travel over the Moosic Mountain and established a destination, Farview Park, at the summit of the mountain. The park was opened in fall of 1885, consisted of more than 600 acres. That whole area on top of the mountain where that federal prison is now at the top of the mountain at Farview. The park consisted of more than 600 acres, about 30 of which were improved as a picnic ground. In the park, there were more than 20 buildings, the largest of which was a pavilion, 175 feet long and 35 feet wide, built with 4 wings. In the park were swings, rustic seats, tennis courts, football and baseball grounds, open vistas, pure drinking water, two observatories. From the higher of the 2 observatories, at 2,345 feet above sea level, more than 20 cities and 17 lakes could be seen. Farview Park was an instant success. Civic, community, and church groups from all over northeastern Pennsylvania and from as far away as Metropolitan and New York and Boston traveled to Carbondale Waymart not only for the thrill of riding over the Gravity Railroad, but also for the pleasure of spending the day in the salubrious fresh air and sunshine of Farview Park. At one point, there are a lot of statistics in place. At one point, on one day, they took 15,000 people to the top of the mountain up on top of the mountain at Farview. 15,000 people. You find in newspapers at the time the congregation of the Peckville Methodist Church traveled to Farview Park on Friday. The 700 people in the excursion, blah, blah, blah. The numbers are just mind-boggling. It cost to go from downtown Carbondale to the top of the mountain 50 cents. In 1860 money is a lot of money. They were making lots and lots of money. The railroad didn't operate on Sunday, but Sunday was the big excursion day. There were as many as 15,000 people a day were taken there. You see timetables from the railroad where it says passengers traveling in groups 1 to 25, 25 to 50, 450 to 500, 550 to... People traveled from all over the eastern United States to go to that park on the top of the mountain. There are advertisements in Boston newspapers and New York newspapers about coming to the fresh air and sunshine of northeastern Pennsylvania. It was a huge success, and they made a lot of money on it. And they did that until the end of the 19th century when people started looking for other places for entertainment. And then Lake Lodore opened an amusement park at Lake Lodore, where they had a merry-go-round and more up-to-date things, because at the top of the mountain here, it was just a pleasure park, fresh air and sunshine. That was the principal commodity, because these people were leaving greasy, grimy, dirty industrial towns in the Lackawanna and Wyoming valleys to get out in the fresh air and sunshine. And so it was the D&H was very good on capitalizing on that need for people to get out in the fresh air and sunshine. And it changed everything. All this stuff with the D&H in the Lackawanna Valley and Wyoming valleys. America was in the middle of an energy crisis when the operations began in the early years of the 19th century. All the trees had been cut down. All these hillsides were bare. You look at some very old photographs, and you can see nothing but bare hillsides. And now they're covered with trees, but the trees had all been cut down. And America was in its first major energy crisis. What are we going to do? And when the War of 1812 was going on, the British blockaded the eastern seaboard. They couldn't get coal from Wales. New York, New England, and Boston, Philadelphia were in it was a major crisis. We have no fuel. What are we going to do? Fortuitously, at that point, coal was discovered here, and that turned everything around. And by the end of the 19th century, millions of tons of coal, many millions of tons of coal, were sent out of here to market. It was sent up into New York State. It was sent up into Canada. It was shipped up the Hudson River to Albany, and then transshipped through the Erie Canal to the American Midwest. It was sent up the Champlain Canal to Canada, to the Hudson River. It was just unbelievable. The coal we have in Carbondale, we have receipts from coal dealers in New Orleans for coal bought in the Lackawanna Valley. The coal was taken to New York, out into the Atlantic Ocean, down the Atlantic Ocean, around Florida to New Orleans. Coal was traveling. It was going everywhere. Everybody needed a fuel, and tons of coal by the million were shipped out of here, and it changed everything in America. And the undeniable fact is that the coal shipped out of this Lackawanna and Wyoming valleys made the industrialization of America possible in the 19th century. Before all this coal was available, we were a nation of small towns and villages, and not a really big industrial kind of thing. By the end of the 19th century, we were a major league world player in the industrial world, and it was only because of this anthracite coal. I recently actually it was Richard Burton who was being interviewed by someone, and they were talking, Richard Burton, who was Welsh, and it turns out I'm half Welsh, so I was interested in watching him. Richard Burton and an interviewer were talking about coal, and Richard Burton was talking about all the coal in Wales, and then he brought up it's no longer controversial. I think it's being regarded as a basic fact. There are only a few places in the world where there's a lot of anthracite coal. Right here was one of the largest deposits of anthracite coal in the world. You don't find anthracite coal in Timbuktu or China. You find it here. And if you think about world geography and people who talk about continental drift and that kind of thing, if you were to push Great Britain and Europe out into the Atlantic Ocean, they would fit right into our coastline like a glove. Continental drift was when the continents drifted apart. And so essentially northeastern Pennsylvania was at one point connected to Scotland, and Scotland was connected to continental Europe. But then continental drift, the continents moved apart. There are only 3 major places in the world where anthracite coal is found: northeastern Pennsylvania, Wales, and northern Spain. And there is a coal field which extends just like that. There's Spain, there's Wales, there's northeastern Pennsylvania. And I think it's a very compelling argument. If you just look at world geography maps, and the way Europe and America sort of come together. There also, there was a lady by the name of Bernadette Slick. She was a realtor in Forest City. She called me one day about 10 years ago. I think she's now deceased, but she called me 10 years ago. And she said, "Robert, I have something I want to give you." Okay, I hope it's money. She said, "Come to Forest City." I went to Forest City, and she said, "I live out where I went to her house." And she was a very sort of, she just looked like a Forest City native. She didn't have anything extraordinary about her. She was a nice lady, very charming, and she was, I want to show you something. She took me through her house. I was out of breath in admiration by the time I finished. This room had only green minerals and stuff. This one had these sort of glowing red minerals. This one had this had this kind of rock. That had this kind of rock. She had an amazing collection of local geology. She was apparently she was a highly educated woman. She wanted to give me her whole collection. I said, "Mrs. Slick, we'd be delighted to have it. We have no place to put it, and furthermore, it belongs in a larger museum than we are. It needs something on the state level or beyond." She had this extraordinary collection of minerals and rocks and things from. She said to me at that point, and I shall be grateful to her forever for having said it. She said, "Of course, the coal miners all knew when they got down to conglomerate rock, that was the end of the coal. Conglomerate rock is a very hard, very specific kind of rock. It is always at the base of coal fields. All the miners knew that when you get down to, when you run into conglomerate rock, that's it. There's nothing below it." I thought, well, that's an interesting fact. I remembered it, and then I thought, oh my goodness. And then I was doing some work on the Roebling aqueducts at Lackawax, and I wanted to learn more about them, but they were part of the D&H system. So I went to Rome, New York, and spent a week at Rensselaer in the Roebling, reading the Roebling papers. And Roebling himself, was focused on conglomerate rock. I thought, oh my God, this is so interesting. So the conglomerate rock is only found here in Pennsylvania, Scotland, Wales, and that's the only place you find conglomerate rock. That's the only place you find anthracite coal. So there's a strong connection. But she made that connection, and I shall always be grateful to her for that, because. And I think all of you have seen conglomerate rock in your world. You know how people have these fancy rock in their front yard, a big sort of a son of a gun that looks it has this sort of gnarly kind of look to it, and it sort of looks like it's a collection of pebbles all for it. That's probably conglomerate rock. The base of Carbondale City Hall and the old part of the building is conglomerate rock. On the Roebling aqueducts, on the Hudson River, on the Delaware River, in crucial spots that hold up those bridges is conglomerate rock. I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. And it's all connected to anthracite coal, and which has a hardness of 8. Diamonds are a hardness of 10. It is a very hard substance, and it's all associated with anthracite coal. And it's also associated with these Roebling aqueducts, because at very specific spots in those aqueducts where the cables are anchored, it must never. You know how things like bluestone and other rocks can sort of chip away and flake away. This stone must never flake away, because if it does, the aqueduct's going to collapse. It has to remain permanent, and it's this conglomerate rock. I developed over the years a very strong interest in those 4 Roebling aqueducts that he built for the D&H across the Delaware River and the Neversink River and up in the High Falls, and. I confronted what I thought, there's something I don't know, I need to know more. So I went up to Rensselaer and spent a whole week there reading the Roebling papers. And by the end of the week, I felt like John Roebling and I were best friends, because I'm looking at these papers where he had a sketch that sort of looked like. Looks like that, and that turns out to be a preliminary sketch of the Delaware Aqueduct. That's exactly what it is. It was like going back in time to participate in his thought process. And I learned a lot about Roebling during that time there. It was an amazing experience in the rare book room at Rensselaer. I went up there with the standard sort of white gloves that people wear for historical research. The lady in the rare book room said, "No. It's better if you wash your hands and get all the oil off, because the gloves just transfer nastiness around. You don't want to wear those white gloves." So I was finally allowed into the inner sanctum where the Roebling papers are. And I sat down. Of course, I had a pencil. I didn't have you wouldn't allow. They don't allow you a pen. I had a pencil, and she disappeared. Then she came back with a box number 1 of stuff for me to look at. She put it in front of me, and I went, "Oh, don't touch it." Sorry. So she then became my personal assistant for about a week, because I sat there at this table, and she opened the box, and then she took a piece of paper, and then she moved it from A to B, and then I was able to read it. And when I was ready to turn the page, I would go, and then she would turn the page again. So she was my personal slave, if you will, for a week. She stood there, and I wasn't allowed. I could photograph, I could read, but I couldn't touch. Anyhow, I learned a lot about John Roebling in that process, and I had the pleasure of attending, not too awfully long ago, a presentation by this person who regards himself as being the be-all and end-all of Roebling history. And as he was doing his presentation, I thought, aha, I know where he stopped learning about Roebling. He never read these 5 papers. He said he also had been to Rome, but he got there. He was just simply a lazy historian. He didn't finish. Oh, I got enough for it. That's it. I'm getting out of here. So I now know what he didn't know and didn't learn during his time in the Rome. I love things like rare book rooms, because it's like opening a page to history. There it is. It's like I learned that I became so familiar with Roebling's style that he misspelled the word aqueduct constantly, and so that was. I thought there's one of his notes. But anyhow, this whole process of documenting history is I have an enormous appetite for it, and those 5 rebuildings of the Gravity Railroad that I've been going through for a little while here, they are part of those 26 volumes that I did, in which there are 10,000 pages of stuff on the Gravity Railroad in those. So you've got a highly contracted version of my 10,000 pages. But anyhow, I have an endless appetite for doing historical research. I just love. I can't get enough of it, and but it's an ongoing process. Ever since I finished those first collection of volumes, the recording of history is an ongoing. It never stops. So after I did volume 24 and up to 26, I then began doing what I call an addendum. Every year I do an update of new material that I've learned. And I've been doing that for the last 7 years. And there's like even in those addenda, some of them have 500 or 600 pages of new material on the D&H. You would think by this point, where are you getting all this information on the D&H? Well, it's out there. You have to sort of connect up with the right web pages and the right railroad groups and so on, and talk to the right people. And I have this obsession with recording data, recording information for the future. Get it in an electronic format. Get it on paper. Say that you can't lose this. It's too valuable. It's part of our history. And so anyhow, this will be the 7th year now that I'm coming out. At the end of December, will be yet another 400 or 500 page addendum to all this other stuff. So anyhow, it's an ongoing process, and it pleases me enormously. I don't know if you know Cody Gonsalves sitting here in the front row, but he is the life spirit of the Carbondale Township Historical Society, and he has a wonderful passion for railroad stuff and lanterns and all kinds of stuff. And the Carbondale Township has a remarkable collection of stuff, and the Carbondale Township Historical Society has only been around for a few years, but under his leadership, they have gathered together some remarkable stuff. And it's really his passion for it is exhilarating, and he deals with all these people who's like selling railroad lanterns for like, this lantern's worth $1,000, this one's worth $1,500. He deals with them very effectively, and anyhow, it's good to have other people out there being crazy. Like Dale is crazy with his cemetery thing, that's good. What's your cemetery count now, Dale?
577,
577.
about 64,000 tombstones.
54,000.
64,000.
64,000. Well, you've been lazy. Get going here. That's a lot of data. But the all of this stuff of mine, as I said, is online too. Just type the title and it should appear on your screen, and there it is. And but it's the history of our social order, history of our community. It's very important that this stuff be saved. And an amazing thing that Cody's been involved with is this cemetery in Carbondale, in Childs, the Brookside Cemetery, which had a lot of problems in the 1930s and 40s because a lot of graves they tell me were falling down into the mines below that area, and so a lot of people abandoned the cemetery. But then there's the mystery to be solved. I'd like to know more about it. Is that there are probably what, 30 veterans in there? 40?
28 to 30 known Civil War veterans.
Why are 30 Civil War veterans buried in that Brookside Cemetery? In Maplewood Cemetery in Carbondale, there are 7,000 people, and there are only a half dozen Civil War soldiers there. Here there are 30 in Brookside. There's a reason why they're there, and I'd love to know why they're there. They probably are. They're not all residents, local residents. They must be from other places. They were brought there for burial, and it's an interesting unsolved question. But this guy's focusing on getting a solution to that, which is great. But his passion for this local history is exciting. I got an email a year ago from a museum outside of Philadelphia that said, we're downsizing our collection. I'll send you a list. If anything in the collection you want, just let us know. We'll deliver it to you. My immediate question would be, yes, we want it. Whatever, yes, anyhow. And we'll deliver it to you. So I went through the list, Cody went through the list, and we sort of check. Unbelievable stuff. Railroad stuff, crystal, china, all kinds of stuff, furniture, delivered right to the City Hall. So it's good to have a kindred spirit nearby who can participate in this craziness. But anyhow, we were given amazing stuff, gorgeous furniture, gorgeous stuff, European porcelain, all kinds of things, silver, a lot of that, and oh my gosh. I want to say one final thing, and then I'll shut up. I got a letter from a place called the Medina, New York Railroad Museum. The letter was originally sent to Steamtown, and then Steamtown said, "No, you got to talk to Powell." So this letter that I got from the Medina Railroad Museum, a very lovely person said to me, "We're downsizing our collection. This is really out of scope. I'm not sure what these maps are, but we have a lot of maps. Do you want them?" That's like asking a kid if they wanted candy. Do you want them? Oh my God, yes, we want them. She said, "They're yours if you'll pay for the shipping." 11 map volumes. She sent me the weight and the dimensions of the boxes. There were 11 map volumes with maps this wide, this high, all railroad maps. I thought, what are these maps? She said, "I think there may be Pennsylvania, New York. I'm not sure what they were." I coughed up the $340 to pay for them to be shipped to me in Carbondale. And I opened one of these boxes and I thought, I'm going to faint. This is unbelievable. 11 volumes of railroad maps, 4 or 5 of which deal with the Lackawanna Valley and northeastern Pennsylvania. It'll take me the rest of my life to process these map volumes. Unbelievable value. Pages this wide, full color maps, railroad maps. They look sort of battered when you look at them, but when you open the front cover, wonderful full color maps, and they were being gotten rid of. They're out of scope for our collection. Do you want them? Yes. The same way all this stuff, all this furniture is. Yes. Anyhow, so there's always new stuff coming forward, and unbelievably rare maps of northeastern Pennsylvania, of upstate. The DNA shipped a lot of coal into New York. Lots of upstate New York maps, and on and on and on. It's just a remarkable thing which sort of waltzed into my world. A lady in California contacted me about a year ago, and she said, I have some old D&H minute books. Do you want them? Yes, we do want them. She sent it to me, and what they are the corporate minutes for the board of directors of the D&H in the 19th century, from like the 80s and 90s up into the 30s. I thought I was going to faint when I opened those. I thought, oh my gosh, look at this. The members of the board of directors, such people as John Jacob Astor, Robert Oliphant, all these heavy-duty Americans were on the board. And the minutes of these meetings was Mr. Astor, with the consent of Mr. Oliphant, suggested we deaccession the breaker, blah, 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 yeah. But here we have heavy-duty American industrialists talking about the D&H. It's just these unbelievable things that just keep surfacing all the time. You know, it's like it's just. But when I said yes to this woman from the Medina Railroad, I thought, what am I getting myself into? But books about with all kinds of stuff on breakers and all kind. Oh my gosh, it was just unbelievable. And they'd been kept under bad storage conditions. They had a mustiness to them when I got them. I immediately put them out in the sunshine and dried them out thoroughly. They're in great shape now, and they're sort of archived away. But it will take years to process the data in these maps, which is it's a gift from above. I mean, to get these things, new data, new raw materials, and here we go. Anyhow, I've run out of I'm out of time. But anyhow, on that table, there's a summary of each rebuilding of the railroad. There's a bibliography with all these hundreds of things that I've written, and there in the back of the table is all copies of lots of those articles. So if you're interested in any of it, help yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Outstanding.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you very much.